Hi everyone, my name is Thomas Oakes and I did my article presentation on the usage and attribution of Stack Overflow code snippets on GitHub projects, which is an article by Sebastian, Baltes, and Stephan Diehl. So getting into it, we all know Stack Overflow as the most popular question and answer website for software developers with over 13 million answered questions and about 8 million registered users. The ease of access to millions of coding questions with copy and paste solutions really poses the dilemma of either copying the answer or building it from scratch. Copying code snippets from Stack Overflow has led to problems in the software development industry as people don't really understand what their code is doing by just copying and pasting it. And that leads to a bunch of maintenance issues and it gets really messy in a coding sense. But even more serious is copying and pasting code from Stack Overflow could lead to licensing issues. So by accepting Stack Overflow's terms of service, you're agreeing to the Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike 3.0 unported license, which is a license by the Creative Commons Corporation and enforced by Stack Overflow. So this this license, it pretty much has two clauses. There's the attribution clause that basically requires a link to the original post as well as the names of the authors on Stack Overflow, both the question, like the author of the question that was asked, and the name of the author that answered the code that somebody copied and pasted from. And then the other clause of this license is the share alike clause, which basically says all work that comes, like is based off of code from Stack Overflow must use a compatible license depending on how it was changed or how it was used, or like there's a lot of different criteria there. But and then corresponding there are a lot of different licenses. And this system of, like, it's not really clear as to which license you really need for a specific action or anything like that. It gets confusing because Creative Commons licenses themselves are not typically used for software, and there's no non-Creative Commons license that is considered share alike compatible, so like compatible under this license by the Creative Commons Corporation. So the Creative Commons Corporation themselves, they don't even recommend their own licensing to be used in this way. Their licenses are more focused on other stuff. I'm not really sure what, but not software. So Creative Commons, there's a quote from them that says, it would be difficult to integrate Creative Commons licensed work with other free software, which poses a really complicated situation because since there are no options on which licenses are obtained for different circumstances, Stack Overflow code may have been copied from a source that either has a more permissive or a more restrictive license than the one used on Stack Overflow, which which is called dual licensing, and it leads to a lot of conflicts and like a really legal gray area. So in my opinion, I don't think Creative Commons has the right to enforce their licensing on Stack Overflow, since the regulations are not based on something that is viable for use in the software development industry. So like I understand the need for copyright on code and there should be a level of regulation for that. But when people post code snippets on Stack Overflow, the intent is for usability by the person that asked the question. And since the premise of Stack Overflow centers around answering people's coding questions, there shouldn't exist a threat of copyright infringement for copying and pasting code snippets. If someone answers a question on Stack Overflow with a code snippet, they're essentially giving their consent for people to use that code, since answering the question is completely optional. So, yeah. Okay, so this article gets into a few examples of lawsuits and like definitions of copyright infringement, basically, and how using incorrect licenses could lead to copyright infringement and the consequences of that. So, in the so the source code for public software projects is available on the internet in GitHub. So this article uses these GitHub datasets to analyze the frequency of proper usage and attribution of Stack Overflow code. So they basically go in and look at, oh, did these repositories correctly cite, or did they follow the Creative Commons license from Stack Overflow? So GitHub users that do not properly comply with Stack Overflow's requirement are at risk for copyright infringement. So it's really under debate right now as to the exact definition of what is copyrightable code and what is not. So in the Oracle versus Google lawsuit, the judge ruled that basically APIs are not copyrightable, but then later that was overturned by the Federal Circuit. So there's really clearly no defined rule as to what can or cannot be copyrighted. And pretty much because of that, the consensus has been, it's been by Arnold Engelfrit. He basically says if two programmers would provide basically the same piece of code, the code is not creative under copyright law. So that is really the definition that the legal system has used for determining what is copyrightable in this loose definition of what is copyrightable. So Stack Overflow argues that code snippets that are more than 1 or 2 lines long fall under the category of it being non-trivial, like it's a non-trivial solution, so it can be copyrightable. So this article, they find that the average code length on Stack Overflow is about 12 lines long, which means that the vast majority of code snippets on Stack Overflow are copyrightable, and they require the proper licensing. So a large scale version of this exact thing is in the Free Software Foundation versus Cisco Systems lawsuit. So Cisco violated the licensing terms of software on which the Free Software Foundation had a copyright. So as a result, Cisco obtained the proper licensing, or they were required to obtain the proper licensing, and they had to make a they had to basically pay Free Software Foundation a large amount of money for the infringement. So the point of that is it can really happen to anybody. Like if software licensing is violated, you can get your code taken down, you can have to pay a fine. So got to get that licensing correct. Okay, so getting into the article, or the research itself of the article, there was a preliminary study of 122 people in the software industry. It was basically found that 98% of them said that they use Stack Overflow in personal or work related projects, and 49% of those participants reported that they did not give credit when copying Stack Overflow code in their project. And another 40% added a source code comment with a link to the corresponding question or answer, which is only half of the requirements. It only fits the attribution clause, not the share alike clause of the Creative Commons license for Stack Overflow. And this survey shows that almost half of developers are not aware of Stack Overflow's licensing and its consequences. So there were 3 data sets that were used in the research of the article. There was the BigQuery GitHub dataset, which has 4.1 million projects, like public projects from GitHub. There's the BigQuery GitHub torrent dataset, which has 3 million GitHub public projects, and the BigQuery Stack Overflow dataset, which has 21 million answers on Stack Overflow. So their research concluded that at most 25% of Java projects on GitHub are properly attributed, which is only half of the requirements. Attribution being like the link to the original question, and the names of the authors are included somewhere in the project. So to get this number of 25% of GitHub projects are properly attributed, 3 approaches were used. So the first approach was the 10 most popular Stack Overflow Java code was searched through in GitHub public projects, and 23% of the Stack Overflow code was properly attributed. So that's what we can see in this table right here. So this is the table illustrating their research. So we can see in the bottom right corner, which is the conclusion, pretty much, that 23% of the Stack Overflow code, it was properly attributed. Okay, so the next phase of their research was that a clone detector was used to find if copies of 222 different Stack Overflow code snippets were present in GitHub projects. So that is table 5, the top right corner of the presentation. And from this, we can see that out of 2,000, like 300-ish projects, only 24% of them properly attributed code, which is surprising. And the clone code detector, it basically went through the Java, the project on GitHub. It looked for a Java project, and it basically took out the comments and white space and compared the code after that. to kind of get more leniency, because the different comments and different like spacing would, and like different variable names and that kind of stuff, it wouldn't show up as an exact match for copying and pasting code. So that was their second step of the project. And then, or that, there's the second phase of this section of their research. And then the last phase was exact copies of like 30,000 Stack Overflow code snippets were searched for in about 65,000 GitHub Java projects, and only like 8% of the copied and pasted code was attributed in this section. So any tests, like from phase 1 to phase 3, between 3% and 12% of the GitHub projects contained a file that had a link to the Stack Overflow question that they either copied or like heavily based their code off of. And by the Creative Commons share alike 3.0 unported license, this is not the proper way of gaining use to the code snippet. Like a license is required. So giving only a file with the link to the Stack Overflow question, it only fills out half of the requirements. It's only the attribution requirement. You also need the share alike requirement and the licensing that goes with that. So when analyzing the BigQuery GitHub dataset, which again has like 4 million projects, like 4 million public projects on GitHub, not necessarily all Java, but they only tested the Java, but it's just a huge data set of projects. None of the projects used the Creative Commons license in the way that is required by Stack Overflow, which is crazy that none of the projects use that while it's required, and serious like legal implications can arise, and every person that didn't use it, that didn't have the proper licensing, they could be subject to copyright infringement, which it is very likely that people just do not know about this, which I didn't know about it before I read this article. But this article, since none of the projects used the correct licensing, they were like, okay, let's look at this other license that is a lot more popular than the Creative Commons license. It's called the GNU General Public License. And it pretty much checks the share alike requirement. It passes a lot of the tests. It checks a lot of the boxes. So they assumed this was okay. And they went ahead and tested like what percent of these projects are now okay with us testing this different license. And even doing this, only 1.8% of all public GitHub projects that they tested were properly attributed with the correct license. So to still, like, their conclusion is it is so rare to find the proper documentation, which is surprising. And I thought it was a big point in the article that people just have no idea about this. And I definitely think it is not people's fault that they don't know about this, because I didn't know about this until I read this article. But I think, in my opinion, it's definitely on the Creative Commons Corporation to make it more accessible, to make it easier for people to obtain the proper licensing because a lot of people are subject to copyright and they don't know it. So yeah, other than that, I think the article did a very good job about displaying and really like walking the reader through the information that they did, their research that they did. And I think it was a very solid article and pointed out a lot of issues, a lot of things that need to be fixed, a lot of background information. So yeah, it was a good article. So yeah, that was my presentation. Thank you.